Or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast, brought to you by Truelytics, the one and only comprehensive advisor transition management platform. This week, I'm joined once again by Terry Mullen, the CEO of Truelytics, and we are going to be talking about RIAs because the Truelytics team has been taking a deep dive look at RIAs, and not just the biggest of the big RIAs, really looking at the entire segment of the wealth management business that is represented by registered investment advisors, particularly those in the retail space. So those serving individual clients and high net worth individuals and families. So less so on the RIAs that are dealing with pension funds and selling into corporations and so forth. So there may be some overlap there. As we all know, some firms deal with high net worth individuals and they have pension funds and retirement plans for companies that they're serving. But we're just talking about, for the most part, what we think of on average as financial advisors that are operating in an RIA environment. So whether that's a solo advisor, one IAR for the RIA firm, or an RIA that has 100 advisors and several $1 billion under management. Okay. So that's kind of the level set for what we're going to be talking about today. Terry and I are going to cover a lot of ground because one of the things we started to notice in studying this segment is there are a few areas that really speak to what Truelytics is doing for the industry that need addressing within the RIA segment. Number one is performance, right? RIA performance on the business level, not just, as Terry says, not just at the revenue number and the AUM number, but how is the organization itself performing when compared to its peers, right? Other RIA firms that look similar. So we'll talk a little bit about that and what a firm can do to improve their performance, what a firm can do to look at the benchmarking and take that benchmarking and decide how to move forward with this business, right? What does it mean when you look at a benchmark? We're going to be talking about recruiting because, listen, 40% of advisors are 60 plus, right? The average advisor is 60 years old right now. We have a pandemic that's particularly scary for that segment. Even without the pandemic, we could expect a lot of turnover coming in the next decade, not only in the form of retirements, right? And advisors just leaving the industry because they want to retire and then using succession planning, but we're going to see a lot of M&A activity. And there's a few other factors that are going to come into play that we expect to see drive an increase in M&A activity in the RIA segment. And we'll cover those as well. We're also be talking about some of the new tools that Truelytics is bringing to the fore to service M&A activity and also to make businesses more secure with emergency continuity, because again, that's something I think that's probably on a lot of our minds as we think about our business lives, is what would happen if something happened to me or something happened to one of my top producing advisors or several of my advisors at once. How would the business handle that should that emergency come about? So really focus on RIAs here for this show. It's going to be a great one. As always, make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast. You'll find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. Also, send an email to podcast@truelytics.com or hit us up on the socials if you have a question or suggestion for the show. And if that suggestion is a guest you'd like to see on the show, that's been working out a lot lately, by the way. We've got some really cool guests coming up in the future that have reached out to the show saying, hey, this person or these founders, little hint there, might be a really good for an episode. So stay tuned for that. Okay, without further ado, let's get to it with Terry Mullen on Truelytics for RIAs. Well, hey, Terry, I'm really excited about this conversation today because we've been looking at RIAs in a lot of detail recently. So let's dive in.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that we were talking about is how important a few things are for RIAs right now, here in 2020, and for the future of the business. And one of the things that comes to mind immediately is performance benchmarking for RIA firms. Why do you think performance benchmarking is so important for today's RIA?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned performance because when you think of performance, immediately people think about how their clients are performing. And, everybody would love to, in today's world, we went down what, I don't know, 30% and then back up and your clients don't know anything. And people are really focused on that. What they haven't made, in many cases, focused on is their own performance. How are they doing? And how is their firm stacking up against somebody else? And I think that the firms that have figured that out and started to really look at the numbers have a handle on it and then can address it. As Peter Drucker said, I think he's the one that is credited with it. But you can't manage what you can't measure, or you don't manage what you don't measure. And I think that we're able to help RIAs do that and wealth management firms to do that.
Yeah, no, so here's the funny thing, and I don't think it's obvious to everyone. You mentioned looking at your performance against other firms, right? Kind of that's what benchmarking means. Why is benchmarking specifically something that an RIA should care about? Like, why should I care how I'm doing against, other RIAs that are of similar size?
I mean, I would throw the question back at you or anyone that is thinking about that with respect to what we were just talking about clients' performance. You would never say to your client, don't measure your investment performance and compare me against somebody else or one of your friends at a cocktail party. I mean, it's one of the things that you have to do to understand how your business is doing. So, do you have the right number of staff for the size of your firm? Are you too small in terms of people or not big enough? Are you spending the right amount of money on marketing and business development, things like that? I mean, there are a lot of things that you can get out of it. And the problem with our industry is that it is fairly opaque. It's tough to get a lot of this information, although it's becoming easier. And then with historically, we've gotten it from a handful of benchmark reports that come out that are on a very few number of firms. And in many cases, those firms are nothing like yours. So wouldn't it be great if you could actually look at your firm, compare it to either firms of similar size or firms of the size that you want to become? Wouldn't it be great to know what a firm that you aspire to be like looks like today? And therefore, you can then see what are the things I need to do to make sure I get there.
I think you hit on some really important points there because as I think about it, you know, your marketplace that you're participating in doesn't stand still, right? It's we're constantly evolving. The business is constantly moving in different directions. And some RIA firms, your peers or what you hope to be your aspirational peers above you, are doing some things a little bit differently that are allowing them to grow more rapidly or allowing them to become more profitably. So looking at what they're doing and how they're doing it and how you measure up against that can really help your business. Along that line of thought, what are, in your opinion, some of the most important benchmarks that an RIA firm should be looking at today as we
Yeah.
sit here in mid 2020?
So I'll give you a few. Obviously, the number one or two, depending on is going to be the size, right? So how many assets do you manage, and then respectively, what is the revenue that you're generating? Those certainly can help, but just looking at assets, if you're a wealth management firm focused on the mid market, not the ultra high net worth, you can't compare yourself to a similar size firm that's going after the ultra high net worth. Their price structures are different, et cetera. So don't just look at AUM. A couple of the things that I would look at is your return on assets. What are you getting on the assets, right? That's basically the what you're charging on assets in total, right? And that's just your assets divided by your revenue. But as you go down further, revenue per client, revenue per employee is one that I know many firms that are really successful are looking at. Your operating expense ratios and margins and where that's being spent. Those are things that I think are really important. How many how many assets do you have per relationship manager, per advisor, depending on how you view that term. So those are a couple. I mean, I could give you a bundle that we look at, but I think that's probably a good start.
I like that. It's funny. That echoes one of the conversations you and I had months ago when we did a show on benchmarking with the Catherine from
Yeah,
AFA,
with
and
Catherine and Tom from Modera.
that's right. And Tom's thing, when he said, what was his number one benchmark that he looks at, it was exactly what you said there. One of the first ones, that revenue per advisor was really important to him to understand like how the business is performing. Because if it's going up, great. If it's going down, let's look at it. If it's just market related or whatever, or if there are other drivers there, really, really
And I
interesting.
think similar per employee was another one that I believe he mentioned, because they have support staff, and making sure that you have the right support staff, and are they are they generating the return that you're looking for on that.
Absolutely.
you know, just looking at, for instance, the number of new accounts you bring on each year is only looking at one half of the equation. You have to also look at how many people are going out the back end. So it's really the net new clients. And that, again, is only one piece. If I'm a very, very large firm and I added 100 new clients versus a smaller firm that's adding 100 new clients and maybe losing a similar amount, that growth rate is going to be very different. You could see a growth rate that might be 10% on the smaller firm because they're adding 100 and losing 20, and versus adding 100, losing 20, but you started out with 10,000 clients, right? So it's really important to not just look at the total number, but also the ratio or the percentage that you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's you make a really important point there. That's why the peer group and the making sure that you're taking into other relevant factors into the equation matters so much. One of the things we've talked about, over the years with Truelytics is that, that ultimate benchmark or that ultimate KPI is a firm's valuation, right? And so we think about all these other benchmarks that we've been talking about and how important they are for a business, but let's talk a little bit about valuation. What goes into calculating a valuation as a benchmark, if you will, for an RIA business?
So that's a good question. And I just want to comment, if I can, and get back to the question on the first part of that, which was it
Sure.
being the ultimate KPI. And I will tell you that I have had that. I still believe it is the ultimate KPI. The problem is that not everybody else thinks that. And it's really hard to convince somebody who is never thinking about going to sell their firm. Then valuation really doesn't matter, right? But the problem with the vast majority of this industry is that they may not they may not have a choice but to sell, or they're going to exit the business because of death or disability before they were fully planned, and it's going to happen regardless. So they need to be aware of what it is. So valuation is definitely something that is important and everybody should look at, even if it's not the ultimate KPI. But the valuation, I mean, these businesses, because they are, they're dealing with intangibles. It's not like they have, a whole bunch of assets that are fixed assets and plants and machinery and stuff like that. It's based on the revenue that you are generating today, based on the assets that you're managing, and maybe planning fees and other stuff. But a buyer is going to look at what is the projected revenue that I'm going to get after I take over this business. And then I'm going to discount that back in the case of a discounted cash flow model. So we look at the projected future revenue stream, and we adjust for a lot of stuff, including intangible things like average client age and net new clients and a whole bunch of stuff that will get you to that, including the growth rate that we're expecting to come up with a number. Or we're going to look at it from a multiple of your EBITDA, and then adjust that for the owner's compensation and things like that, and that will then be multiplied by a multiple, right? That is going to be dependent on the size of the firm, the health of the firm, etc. So at the end of the day, valuations in this space are always forward looking, right? They don't care what you did in the past. What is the revenue that's going to be generated on this asset that I'm buying? And then I'm going to discount it back for interest rates and risk.
It's interesting in that description of how the valuation is calculated. It really does support why valuation is the ultimate KPI, or at least something that should be a high priority for any business owner to understand and review regularly because everything you do in your business either will increase the valuation of that business or decrease the valuation of that business when you start to look at all the different moving pieces, right? So, obviously, if revenue stays the same, but somehow your cost structure goes up, well, your valuation would go down,
Go
right?
down.
Because cash
Yep.
flow is going to be reduced over time. It's a very simple way to think about it. And conversely, obviously, if revenue is growing faster than expenses, that becomes a more valuable business. And then there's a lot of other pieces that are at play there. If your business is getting more efficient, right? You have more revenue per employee, valuation goes up.
That's exactly right. And so it's not always a one-to-one trade-off, right? I mean, you said if your revenue stays the same and your expenses go up, the valuation is going to go down. And that again, in a perfect world or in whatever they call it, is true. However, it could be that the reason that your expenses went up is because you hired two additional people, one to go out and generate new business and one to support the business that you have. So this year, I may have a lower net number, but that is investing in the growth. And I expect that to come up. How am I going to measure that? Well, I need to benchmark it. I need to look at it and measure it and say, okay, did that 100 or 50 or 100 or $200,000 expense generate the return that I expected? And if you aren't going and putting pen to paper and saying, if I make this investment to do X and I expect Y, if you're not then following and tracking that, then you're doing it in the dark. But that's what is going to allow you to make the decisions today that are going to pay off, and then and continue to look at it as you go forward. Technology, expenses where you're investing today in technology that's going to make you more efficient, so you can see more clients and do more, et cetera.
Well, speaking of technology, that's a great segue into kind of the next little subtopic here is that True Performance by Truelytics is kind of the flagship module of the Truelytics platform. And it allows RIAs to easily benchmark their firm against similar scale RIAs and other scale RIAs. Talk a little bit about maybe, if you could, some of the success stories that you're seeing from the use of True Performance by RIAs.
Yeah, so we have, I think, over 7,900 firms on our platform that have signed up and give us data. The data then gives them back some really great information, including valuation, right? So they get 4 different valuation metrics, and they get over 50 KPIs or key performance indicators that we can talk about that refer back to that benchmarking we talked about. But it also gives them a score on their business, client, and market stability, so they can understand where they are today on a host of different metrics. And it is really easy. It takes, no more than a half hour to 45 minutes. And we're even getting to the point where we're going to be able to tap into the SEC database and pre-populate a lot of this information so they don't have to. But they give us information, and then we give them back really great scorecards, and most importantly, the benchmarking. So they can go in and see, okay, I have 250 million in AUM and $1.7 million of revenue. Well, we can show them a peer group that is in that range. So, and tell them how many firms are in that range that have 250 million in AUM and $1.7 million. And it'll be, between, let's say, 200 and 300 million in AUM and $1.6 million to 2.3 million in revenue. And then, oh, by the way, this peer group has, on average, 2 advisors or 4 advisors or 8 advisors or 7 support staff. They, on average, have an operating expense ratio of X or Y, and do that on 50 plus different areas of their firm, many of which they probably haven't even thought about. Whether or not the impact that relying solely on new business coming from referrals. That's actually a negative for someone that is looking to buy your business. Being too heavily dependent on institutional business, things like that all go into things that you need to look at when you value a wealth management firm. How do they use it? They use it right there for that, right? So if they went out and hired a consultant or to do evaluation and to look at this stuff, it's professional services. It costs thousands and thousands of dollars. This is software that the core product is less than, it's roughly $1,100 a year for the core True Performance module. We now have additional modules that are also available. And so they use it for that. They use it for recruiting. There's a ton of people that are looking to grow inorganically, and they're looking to either buy or acquire businesses or bring advisors in. And we have a recruiting module that allows them, that is very easy to do and to understand that. Tom, who we mentioned earlier, has been doing 1 or 2 acquisitions a year. The first thing he does is he gives them a license to Truelytics. They go in, they fill it out. Now they're both on the same page. It's not necessarily going to be the valuation number that he offers to them or that they accept. It's a starting point, just like any valuation is. But it now lets him know, are our businesses similar? Is their tech stack aligned with mine? Or if it's not, that doesn't mean that they're not going to do a deal, but they have to price that in because it's going to cost a little bit more to integrate that type of stuff. So it just is a way that they can use it to be on the same page with those people. So in the RIA community, it's used primarily for their internal purposes. They do valuations every year. This can do that very, very easy and efficiently. They use it for the benchmarking and the KPIs. They use it for any deals that they're looking to do as a first pass before they ever get a banker involved. This costs less than 1 hour or 2 hours of a professional services firm that you would engage, giving you all kinds of additional stuff. We have a continuity module that is available for people. So if in fact something, God forbid, ever happens to you, and somebody doesn't have to go digging into files that they don't even know where they are to find out what has to happen in the event that you got hit by the Uber.
Right. You know what's really interesting about, you mentioned a few elements there that are of incredible value to an RIA firm. You mentioned Tom giving any advisor that they're thinking about recruiting into the business or any firm that they're looking to acquire access to Truelytics. One of the interesting things about that is that it's independent, right? So it's an independent SaaS-based platform, software as a service platform, that any firm or any individual solo RIA can use. And as a result, it's reliable and it's acceptable, right, by people. There's not going to be really any argument about, is this true or is this not true? Of course it's true. You put the information in there. We have information on thousands of other firms. Many of those firms are going to be in your peer group, and we're adding more all the time. The data is constantly being updated, so it's as real time-ish as you can get. So it's always going to be a reliable, independent source for benchmarking, valuation, and other metrics that might be useful to your business.
That's exactly right. And it is also, I'll call it scalable, though that's probably the wrong word, but it's applicable whether you have 80 million in AUM or you have 8 billion in AUM. Because when we do valuations, we look at whatever the multiple is for whatever we're measuring, right? If it's EBITDA, it's a multiple of EBITDA that firms are willing to pay. And that is going to be higher the larger the firm is. It's a more stable firm than one that has more risk that might be smaller. On the discounted cash flow, the first thing you do in a discounted cash flow valuation is start out with your risk premium. What is the risk associated with that asset? These are very, in general, small firms, 1 or 2 person ownership in many cases. Well, that firm is going to have a higher discount rate starting out than a firm that's been in business for 20 years and has $6 billion in assets. Just like ExxonMobil has a different discount rate than does the local hardware store or the local gas station that's independently owned. I mean, it's scalable. So it is. You might argue with whether we measure something differently than somebody else does, but there is nobody that has ever complained or critiqued the accuracy of the output.
That's awesome. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about recruiting. You did mention it as you were talking about how some RA firms are finding value from the platform today. Recruiting new advisors is a core priority for most growing RIA firms, right? They're constantly looking to bring on new advisors, whether that's to replace older advisors who may be retiring, or it's just to add to staff, right? To continue to bring in new blood. Recently, Truelytics launched a new solution called True Recruit. What did you see in the current state of the advisor recruiting landscape that made you believe that a new approach is needed?
So that's a great question. And I'm going to talk about for a second larger enterprise firms, RIAs, which would include broker dealers, right? So broker dealers are also in almost every case RIAs, but they're recruiting, but they're not necessarily recruiting employees. They're recruiting advisors to be part of their broker dealer because they need to clear through a broker dealer, and then to affiliate with their RIA, right? And they don't own them; they're completely independent. Well, that process, trying to recruit broker advisor A from wherever he is to me, is a process that is incredibly outdated, outmoded. It is there's tons of paperwork. There's many hands that do it. It over a long period of time, and then all of that is done with using different systems. They input it, on a piece of paper and put it into a Word document, and then they fax it into somebody in the home office who then puts it into an Excel spreadsheet who then gets it to the people in finance to figure out what that offer that they're going to make. It's just time consuming and very expensive, not expensive because of the time, but also they're in many cases outsourcing this to external people to find those recruits. And that's an expensive proposition. And in many cases, that third party is only providing them the name and the address and maybe a few pieces of information. Well, here we're able to give them with a streamlined approach using technology with a software platform where they can have that all integrated and it seamlessly goes to the people in the back office. It will connect with their CRM system if they wanted to connect with their CRM, or they can use our platform as their CRM. We're not a CRM platform, but from a workflow process, it can work great for that recruit and the ability to manage those recruits. And then when they land them, it takes all of that data, which about 80% of it is what we also need to provide a valuation for. So it just puts them right into the True Recruit, and then they're able to now have that as part of their practice management group and value add for those firms. So that's the large broker dealer way that they use it. For other firms, again, it's simply capturing all that information that you need to know to find out if this is a fit for you. If it's a firm somewhere else who's they have a book already and they're looking to come over and join you. And that will then be a part of the fourth module that we haven't mentioned, and that's the true match. And that's matching up buyers and sellers, as well as what I call recruits, although they're probably not necessarily recruits, but that 65-year-old advisor who doesn't have a formal succession plan. He's sitting in, Enid, Oklahoma. There's nobody around that he has found. None of his kids want to come in, and he wants to, take some time and enjoy life. Well, how about being able to find that person and not only find them, but then understand everything about their business to be able to see if that's the right advisory firm to go and talk about joining your firm or buying their business.
Before we dive into True Match in a little more detail, one of the things that really stood out to me with True Recruit is that, many large firms like the Morgan Stanleys of the world have really large recruiting organizations, and they've, in most cases, invested potentially millions of dollars in their Salesforce powered tools for recruiting and other stuff that they do. But True Recruit gives RIAs access to all of that same horsepower at a fraction of the cost. To me, that was a big wow factor when you showed me how the tool worked.
Yeah, and we can integrate it with Salesforce. I mean, it's not like they don't have to use Salesforce, but I will tell you, as someone that ran large sales organizations, getting people to utilize the CRM system that you developed for the organization as a whole, even if you try to make it so it's tailored for whatever the sales group or for recruiting, still there's a whole lot. I say all the time, and I don't mean this to be pejorative necessarily, but Salesforce can do anything you want, but nothing you need right now because it's so it can do so much. I mean, it's incredible, but you need to hire people to configure it so it works for exactly what you want. And to your point, the cost of the True Recruit module in and of itself is less than, it's a fraction of what they would cost just to have somebody go in and change the Salesforce or apply it for them.
Well, and very similar to the value prop we talked about with True Performance, the fact that this is an independent resource that's SaaS based, that is being used by lots of other organizations means you're getting something that is consistent. It is tailored for your specific use case. Like you said, it's not somebody trying to make Salesforce behave like something that is for financial advisor recruiting. Like, no, this is designed from the ground up with financial advisor recruiting and the needs of the recruiting firm and the recruitee, I guess, right, in mind. And the integration for potential onboarding process with getting them into True Performance and having their evaluation done as well. So it's really, really interesting. It's really exciting space that is happening there. And as you mentioned, there's an integration, if you will, or a commonality in the approach with True Match. So along that line, True Match is on the horizon in the not too distant future. And as you mentioned, it's focused on M&A matchmaking, right, for the RIA space and beyond. So you and the Truelytics team have been talking about this great wave of transition for quite some time. I think the numbers are 40% of advisors are set to exit the business in the coming decade.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, man, we're going to see a lot of M&A, not only because of that and a lot of succession play because of that, but you also have new entrants like Skyview Partners, which has a relationship with Truelytics that is providing funding for the first time that will allow M&A deals to be financed for with outside commercial loans versus the traditional finance through seller financing, which is somewhat challenging and much more arduous. So really, really interesting. How is True Match going to help RIAs with their M&A efforts? If you kind of give them an overview, I mean, I know it's a little peek behind the curtain before things launch, but how do you envision it working, or how should somebody have in their mind how it works?
I would. So the best example will be Zillow, right? So you think about Zillow. Zillow has basically indexed every single commercial residential address in America. And you go into Google right now and put in any address, that's a real address, and it will pop up and tell you some stuff about that, right? It'll tell you the approximate value, the Z estimate, give you some other stuff, and it will give you some comparables, things like that. And it pops up on a map. We'll be able to do the same thing. So you can go in and say, all right, I'm looking to hone in on the Chicago area or Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I want to see firms that are between this AUM and that AUM. And then if we can show you peer group averages. If they're a part of Truelytics, there will be a lot of stuff that you'll be able to see that's publicly available information that we can show you. It's not designed to be an investment bank. I mean, there are people that you're going to need to get together with and bring into the process to make that happen. But it will give you the ability, and it will also have people who have said, I am a seller. I want to sell. I want to look for someone to take over into my business. So it's going to be the Zillow and eHarmony, if you will, because so many of these matches just aren't good matches, right? Because of could be as everyone knows clearly, culture is a big part of it, but it could be that you're focused on financial planning and they're focused on trading, right? So boom, you don't want to talk to them. It's a waste of an hour or 15 minutes. They might be out of your price range or whatever, but it's going to allow that to happen in a way that hasn't happened before. And to your point on funding, we have partnered with Skyview, which has relationships with dozens, I think is up to 30 plus banks around the country. And in many cases, it would be a local bank that would be financing it for acquisitions. We have recently had, money come in through other lenders that we work with as well. But you can now not only use it for acquisition and not seller finance, But if you're looking to do your own organic growth and you want to borrow money to invest in technology or invest in people, they are doing those types of loans as well. So I think that having all of that in one place is great. And and to get the loan done, you need to have a valuation done. They already take the Truelytics valuation that they use for this to process it.
Yeah, it was interesting. That was the first thing on my mind. I mean, having talked to the team at Skyview and others, one of the things that really comes about is they're all saying, look, Truelytics is something we'd love to see, a valuation from Truelytics. We'd love to see your scorecard, your performance scorecard before we lend you money. And that really makes sense because they need to understand how much your business is valued. Just like if you were buying a home, the bank's going to want to see an appraisal before they give you a mortgage. And then they're going to see some inspection elements, like make sure the house isn't going to fall down right after you buy it. Well, the same thing is true of the business, right? Skyview is going to expect you to go, as the phrase says, open kimono with your business. They're going to want to look at all the different elements of your business and understand how it's performing to make sure that you're a good resource or good borrower. I guess that's the best way of saying it. The last area of focus that we've been talking about that is really raised to a much higher level of urgency here in 2020 is continuity planning, right? COVID-19, unfortunately, is hitting the over 60 population particularly hard. And the average age of an American financial advisor now is 60 years old. So that, as I mentioned, the urgency is really going through the roof. Let's talk a little bit about the True Continuity module and how that can help, because it launched earlier this year and you've been working on it for a long time. Man, the timing could not have been more apt. And it's I mean, you didn't know COVID was coming, but my goodness, thank God it was ready to go when COVID blew up.
Yeah, so we've had tremendous response to it. It's a part of several broker dealers' internal programs where they are guaranteeing to step in the event of that unplanned emergency. And don't think of it as the agreement that you have that's the financial agreement, that buy, sell, et cetera. It's that would actually be stored inside of this vault. So it's a locker or vault that is opened by a designated person who has to go through a two-step authentication process in the event that you don't show up to work. And we've had, these happen all the time where, advisor passes away without not only a plan, but without something like this. And it ends up being a nightmare, and for multiple reasons. Obviously, the instance that happened, but then for the clients because nobody's calling. So it's a storage locker that has all of the key contacts, the staff contacts, all the professional contacts, broker dealer custodial contacts, the technology. It has all of your agreements that you have, and and anything that you've put in already because you told us you have a non-compete or you told us that you have a succession plan. All those documents would already be there and available to be unlocked and downloaded. And then it has an action plan, a Kanban board of what has to happen. So now you basically have the roadmap of what has to happen, because think about what happens right now. Now, there are firms that might be listening that have this in place. They're large firms. They have these things in process in many cases. Sometimes it's in a file, but for a lot of firms, it's a 1 or 2 person firm. They don't have it. And in many cases, their agreement is with somebody else that might be at that broker dealer that is in an office across town or in another town. And they don't even have, in some cases, I joke, they don't have the address or certainly not the key to unlock the office, let alone to know what to do, right? This has everything that you need to do to make sure that business retains those assets and retains the revenue, which is in turn going to obviously make this asset more valuable. So that's what True Continuity is. It's a really elegant way to have all of the things that you need to have happen. God forbid an emergency happens. And it can be updated as often and as frequently as you update it. So, if you have an agreement today with somebody and that changes, you can swap it out and have an agreement with somebody else. And for firms like Skyview, for banks and broker dealers, they want to make sure that you're keeping this updated, because that's going to be really important to make sure that, again, those assets stay.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really interesting to me when I first saw it. The big thing to me was what a great thing to have at a firm, because even though, if I am an RIA and I have several advisors, the clients, accounts are with the RIA firm. But as we know, the client's relationship or primary relationship is with an individual advisor, right? They say, Mike
Right.
is my advisor, Terry is my advisor. And should something happen to Mike or Terry, the clients are, there's a little bit of that moment where they're like, do I stay with XYZ financial firm, or do I move to somebody else? Or what's happening there? If there's a clearly laid out plan of attack, if you will, like, here's what we do. If, something happens to Mike, we open this locker and we go down the list of all of his most important clients to reach out to. Oh, here's all the different personality things about those clients. Here's all the other things you need to know about Mike's book of business to make sure that things run nice and smoothly. Just that peace of mind, right? That sleep at night factor for people within the business, but also the clients. It's really, really something that every firm and every advisor should have, in my opinion, especially given what we're going through currently with the pandemic.
Agree 100%.
So, closing things out here, what do you feel is the right size of an RIA firm that should be using Truelytics? I mean, RIAs, span their range from solo RIAs to, up to, ones that have 100 advisors and multiple billions of dollars under one roof. Which size RIAs should be reaching out and using Truelytics?
I think it doesn't matter the size. I think that any of them, we have clients that I said have, less than 50 million in AUM and more than 5 billion in AUM. Some may just want to use one module. They just want to use the True Performance and that's it. That's fine. If they want to use it and have multiple locations, they probably want more of an enterprise, which we have an enterprise offering for OSJs that gives them access to multiple licenses, multiple locations, and we can then bundle that with all of the other modules. So as an example, for an RIA that's, $1 billion, for $20,000 a year, it gives them access to, up to several hundred licenses for True Recruit, True Performance, True Match, and True Continuity. It's white labeled for them. That includes all the onboarding fees. It also includes our Truelytics attribution, which allows them to, for internal purposes, if they're looking to acquire people internally, like a broker dealer or an OSJ type, they can have their own metrics inside of the valuation, because they would value pieces of that differently. So, I would say for any type size firm, it would just, be which of the modules, if, one or all of them they would like.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. I completely agree. Regardless of size, get on Truelytics, start using it. Make sure you understand how your business is performing, understand your valuation. At some point in time, you may want to grow, but you're definitely at some future point in time going to think about exiting the business. And we know that that'll either happen because you decide to, or you will not have an option. As they say, father time is undefeated.
Right.
So really, really useful tool to have in your business. Well, Terry, this has been fantastic. I'm really glad you were able to join me today. Like we said at the top of this podcast, we've been spending a lot of time looking at the RIA segment and how Truelytics can help and what we're seeing in the segment based on a variety of peer groups. So I think this is probably very helpful for people who are at RIA firms, whether they're in the ownership or they're an individual advisor. So thank you.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Take care.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us for this episode. I know we covered a ton of ground here. And, apologize. Terry was really on the move. He really just moved into a new place. He's getting his home office set up there. And I know sometimes during the show, the audio quality wasn't 100% the best, but Terry had such really good insights that when he was in the flow, we didn't want to have to redo anything. So we captured it live. It was really good stuff. I know I appreciated it and learned a lot. As always, make sure you send in those questions and suggestions. This show is for you. We want to hear from you because we want to produce content that is interesting to you, that is useful and impactful for your business. So send in those suggestions to podcast@truelytics.com or swing by the Truelytics website and use the little contact form there. And as always, give us a follow on the socials and let a friend who's in an RIA know about this show, right? If you've got those RIA friends, hey, you listen to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast? That guy Mike and that dude Terry, they're spitting the wisdom out there. You got to check it out, right? Head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and find it. Modern Financial Advisor podcast. Really easy to find. Okay. Hope you're staying safe. Make sure you're wearing your mask. And please be nice to each other, okay? We'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast, okay? See ya. Bye.